Hello and welcome. Today, we're going to dive into a really fascinating Supreme Court judgment, Shanti Devi versus Jagan Devi. It's a case that untangles a property dispute that spanned 50 years, and it all really boils down to one big question. How can a single fraudulent act completely change the nature of a legal document, and, more importantly, the time you have to fight for your rights?
Welcome to today's case law discussion on Shanti Devi versus Jagan Devi, presented by Scoot Legal Translation and Transcription Services, your trusted partner for accurate and confidential multilingual legal documentation.
So here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with the backstory of this long-running dispute, then we'll trace its journey through the different courts. After that, we'll tackle the main puzzle, the question of the ticking clock. We'll get into the nitty-gritty of what makes a document void versus voidable, which is key here. And then we'll see how the Supreme Court put it all together for its final analysis, the verdict, and what it all means going forward.
Okay, so what's this case really all about? Well, at its very heart, it's a fight over a piece of agricultural land, a conflict that started, believe it or not, more than half a century ago.
Just take a look at this timeline for a second. The whole thing kicks off with a sale deed back in 1973. It then takes 11 years until 1984 for a lawsuit to even be filed. And the final word from the Supreme Court, that comes decades later. This wasn't just a court case, it was a legal marathon.
The two sides in this story could not be further apart. On one side, you have the plaintiff, Jagan Devi. Her claim is simple. I never signed anything, someone pretended to be me, I never saw a single rupee, and that sale deed is completely worthless. But on the other side, the defendant, Shanti Devi, says, nope, the whole thing was legitimate, she was there, she executed the deed, and she took the 15,000 rupees. Two totally different realities.
So, with stories that are complete opposites, it's really no surprise that this case had a wild ride through the court system. Each court seemed to have a completely different take on what actually happened.
So it starts at the trial court. They took one look and said, sorry, you're too late, and threw the case out. But then it goes to the first appellate court, and they do a complete 180. They reverse the decision, say the deed is void, and that a 12-year time limit applies, so the lawsuit is perfectly fine. Then it gets to the high court, which agrees with the final outcome, but for a totally different reason. They say a 3-year limit applies, but the clock only started when the plaintiff found out about the fraud. So you see, what a mess. Same result, but nobody can agree on why.
And all of this confusion brings us to the one central question that the Supreme Court had to untangle. Which time limit was the right one? The answer to that would decide everything.
So the big question was this. Was the lawsuit actually filed too late? And to figure that out, the Supreme Court had to decide which specific article from the Limitation Act of 1963 should be used here.
You see, the entire case hinged on these two articles. On one hand, you've got Article 59. It gives you 3 years to cancel what's called a voidable document. On the other hand, you have Article 65, which gives you a much longer 12-year window to get your property back if you have the title. 3 years or 12 years. The choice between these two was literally the whole ballgame.
So how do you even choose between Article 59 and Article 65? Well, it all comes down to understanding the crucial legal difference between something that is void and something that is voidable. This right here is the absolute heart of the matter.
Okay, let's break it down. A void document is basically a total zero from the moment it's created. It's what lawyers call non-est. It never legally existed. This happens when the fraud is about the very nature of the document itself. Think forgery or, in this case, impersonation. The paper might exist, but in the eyes of the law, it's a complete nullity.
Now, a voidable document is different. It looks perfectly valid on the surface, but it has a hidden flaw. And because of that flaw, one of the parties has the right to go to court and get it canceled. This is usually for fraud related to the contents. Maybe you were misled about the terms, or someone pressured you into signing. The document is real until a court says it isn't.
All right, so with that crucial distinction in mind, let's look at how the Supreme Court sifted through the evidence and used past judgments to finally solve this puzzle.
The Supreme Court really dug into the facts, and what did they find? First, the plaintiff's thumbprint on the deed didn't match her official ones. Big red flag. Second, the defendant couldn't even show the court the original sale deed. Third, the defendant's star witness was her own brother, not exactly an impartial observer. And the final nail in the coffin? There was zero proof that the 15,000 rupees ever changed hands. The evidence was really piling up on one side.
To make its case,
The court leaned on a key precedent, Prem Singh versus Birbal. And the principle here is powerful. It basically says that if a document is void from the start, you don't even need a court to officially cancel it. Why? Because it was never legally real to begin with. This meant the plaintiff didn't need to sue for cancellation, so the 3-year limit from Article 59 just didn't apply.
And to really hammer the point home, they brought in another important case, State of Maharashtra versus Praveen Jethalal Kamdar. This one established that when someone takes your property using a void document, the clock you use is the one from Article 65, which gives you 12 years to sue for possession. So, because the sale deed was void, the lawsuit was about getting her property back based on her title. Simple as that.
So with the evidence pointing one way and the legal precedents lining up perfectly, the Supreme Court was ready to deliver its final verdict, and in doing so, provide some much-needed clarity for the future.
And the final verdict was decisive. The appeal was dismissed. The Supreme Court declared that the sale deed was, without a doubt, void. And because it was a suit for possession against a void document, the 12-year time limit under Article 65 was the correct one. Filing after 11 years was perfectly fine. Justice, after a very long time, was served.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? Well, this judgment is incredibly helpful. First, it draws a really clear line in the sand. If a document is void, you have 12 years under Article 65. If it's voidable, you have 3 years under Article 59. Second, for void documents, you don't need a separate suit for cancellation, just sue for possession. Third, it confirms that things like impersonation and forgery make a document void, period. And finally, a sale deed where no money was actually paid is also void. These are some really clear, practical points for all of us.
This all leaves us with one final thought to chew on. How will this judgment change the way lawyers and their clients approach property cases, especially when there are very old claims of fraud and impersonation involved? It certainly seems to open a clearer path for justice in those situations.
Today's case law discussion is brought to you by Scoot Legal Translation and Transcription Services, your trusted experts in multilingual legal documentation for practicing advocates. This audio is created with assistance of Notebook LM.